WCLN 1170 Radio and Star Communications Channel 16 proudly present the We Should Know Show, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative. Now, here's your host, J.W. Simmons, as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. My name is J.W. Simmons. The name of the show is We Should Know. We're coming to you from Star Communications TV Channel 16. We're also simulcast on WCLN Radio on Tuesdays at 2:30. Today we're talking about weather. We're talking about the things that happen around you. Many times we have no control of, but we're talking to a gentleman that's been here before a number of times, Nick Petro. Thank you for being with us. National Weather Service, and your title is Warning Coordination Meteorologist. And that's a pretty long title with some big words, but it just means you are the guy that can look at analytics and data and help determine as much as humanly possible what we may face in the coming year. With that, I want to open the show with a comment that I think it's bolded. And it just struck me. I said, this has got to be the perfect way to open this. NOAA's a National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration. It says bold letters, and I'll flash that for you to see. It says, predicts above normal 2024 Atlantic hurricane season. The folks that's listening to this show today have probably already heard that, but I want you to help us at the beginning, so we'll have plenty of time to get into this, is help us when we see that. I don't know about you, but having faced some hurricanes, Nick, I look at it and I get a sense of anxiety. What are we looking at? Is it going to be worse? Does it just increase our chances? Is these sheer numbers? How should we process that?
Yeah, very good. Well, thank you so much, JW, for having me on the show again and back. I don't think we need to be scared. You know why? Because we can prepare. And as long as you prepare, you should be able to be safe. Now, should we be aware and maybe concerned? Yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily be like overly scared because we have something in our control. Mm-hmm. We can't control the weather, but we can control how we prepare. So let's do the best to control the things we can control, and that is preparation. See, you got to understand that every year we're going to have some kind of tropical storm or hurricane influence, whether it's a direct hit like Fran back in 1996, mm-hmm. or whether it's an indirect hit like a storm that makes landfall on the Gulf Coast and dumps its rain on us on the way north. Mm-hmm. So every year, regardless of what that forecast says, every year we should expect to have one or more tropical storms or hurricanes affect us either directly or indirectly. That said, we live in a hurricane-prone state. We live in a hurricane-prone area. Let's do what we can do to be prepared. And that really is the emphasis. Regardless of what the forecast says, every year we need to take time to prepare.
When we talk about not only preparation, but we hear in these predictions the words La Nina a lot, and somehow that has something to do with the predictables that you guys use, which they're abundant. I want to get into that in a few minutes, some of the data that you look at. But what does that La Nina mean, and what should we consider when we hear that it's going to be an extended year of La Ninas?
Yeah. Well, it's part of what we call the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO for short. And it goes back and forth between two, I would say, abnormal phases, right? Normal being sort of the average water temperature. But we're referring to the part of the Earth in this equatorial Pacific region. So right out in the middle of the Pacific, in the lower latitudes, the tropical areas near the equator, we look at the water temperature there. And if it is below normal, if it's colder than it typically is, colder than it typically should be, then we call that La Nina. If it's warmer than it should be, or warmer than average, that's El Nino. Now, why should we be concerned about water temperature? We're concerned about the weather. Well, remember, almost 3/4 of our planet is covered in water. 3/4 of our planet is water, is ocean. So that ocean and the temperature of the ocean has direct impact on the air above it. And when the water's cold, that means something's going to be different in the atmosphere above it. And in the case of La Nina, what happens is when the equatorial Pacific is colder than normal, the domino effect, if you will, results in the jet stream. We're talking a current of winds, 30, 40,000 feet above the ground in the upper part of the atmosphere. The jet stream is diverted north towards the North Pole. During the opposite phase, when the water is warmer than normal, that's known as El Nino. Then the domino effect, if you will, the downstream effect is that jet stream I referred to is displaced further south over southern North America that extends out into the tropical Atlantic. And there's one thing that hurricanes do not like, and that is strong winds at 30 to 40,000 feet coming from the west that tears them apart. So when we're in the cold phase, the La Nina, and the jet stream is diverted to the north, that leaves the tropical Atlantic wide open with light winds aloft for hurricanes to bubble up and strengthen and become really powerful, and for there to be frequent occurrences of them as well. So that's how the La Nina affects our hurricane season forecast.
As we're going into this year's hurricane season, obviously already started. As we're going into this, the La Nina or El Nina, which one are we looking at now?
So we're looking at the La Nina.
La Nina.
La Nina. So what we're talking about is the ideal conditions in the upper part of the atmosphere where tropical storms and hurricanes in the Atlantic form. Ideal conditions. Meanwhile, while you have these ideal upper level conditions, we have really, really warm, much warmer than normal ocean temperatures in the Atlantic, in what we call the main development region, where tropical storms and hurricanes develop. And that's what hurricanes feed off of. They feed off of warm ocean water. The warmer the water, the stronger the storms can get. That's what they feed off of, warm ocean waters. So while it may be colder than normal in the Pacific, it's warmer than normal in the Atlantic. So it's like a perfect combination. When the Atlantic's warm and the Pacific's cold, look out. It's going to be a busy hurricane season. That's what it boils down to.
The idea of hurricanes that we have seen, and something that you've mentioned on this show in the past a number of times, we always think about wind and whether it's a Category 5 or a Category 3, and a lot of times we focus on that. But you have pointed out so many times that the more important thing, or most important, or equally important rather, is the water and the number of destruction and destroying property that water has. Speak to us about that, Nick, and talk to us about the data and analytics that helps you better tell us as population when and what to expect with water. And to your point, how do we prepare for that?
Right. Well, to set the stage, we think about the different hazards. What are the hazards of hurricanes? Well, it's flooding, storm surge, tornadoes, high winds, rip currents, and strong surf, right? Well, if we go back in the last 20, 25 years here in North Carolina, what has caused the most damage? And it's been flooding. Flooding. And so we always tell folks, when you hear the word hurricane and it's going to, come and get us, and in the forecast is for it to come and affect us, you should be thinking water, flooding. Okay, because unfortunately, the Saffir-Simpson scale, the category, we talk about Category 1, Category 2, that only addresses wind. The Saffir-Simpson scale, which is a scale that goes from 1 to 5, only addresses the strength of the wind.
So that's the force of the wind against a certain building and the ability or resistance.
That's just the wind speed.
Yeah.
Just the wind speed, the wind of the hurricane. And the Saffir-Simpson scale, when you hear, it's a Category 1. Or it's a Category 3, it's a major hurricane. A major hurricane is defined as one that reaches Category 3 or higher on the Saffir-Simpson scale, 111 miles per hour or stronger sustained winds. That's major hurricane. That doesn't tell you anything about water. So a tropical storm or a hurricane, even Category 1 hurricane, while it may not have that strong of a wind compared to a Category 3, that could be major impacts. Water, flooding. Storm surge even for folks along the coast. So what we tell folks now is when you think of hurricane, when you hear hurricane, when you hear, forecasts saying hurricane's coming, think water. Think about, do you live in a flood prone area? And this goes to your question about preparation.
Yeah, absolutely.
How should you prepare? Number one, the first stage in hurricane preparedness is knowing your risk. That is step one. and know your risk. Do you live in an area that has flooded in the past? Ask yourself that. What are my risks?
Yeah.
Do I live in a flood-prone area? That's what everybody should ask themselves when they're thinking about hurricane preparedness. Do I have maybe I have a property at the coast, or maybe I live at the coast. Mm-hmm. Which hurricane evacuation zone do I live in? Because we think, if you live at the coast, if you can see the ocean, or you're even inland from the ocean, you potentially could be affected by storm surge. So you need to know what your risks are. Do you live along a river that has flooded in the past? And if so, you need to be prepared to, where am I going to go when the next storm is approaching? Should I evacuate? Do I know what zone I live in? Do I know what evacuation zone I live in? Because at the coast, there are now in North Carolina evacuation zones. So people need to know their zone, because when evacuations at the coast are called for, they're going to be called by zone. So if a certain zone is called for evacuation, you don't know what zone you're living in, you may not know whether I need to evacuate or not. So that's the first step in hurricane preparedness, is knowing your risk.
On predictabilities, we're used to, as citizens, I guess, out here in the non-analytic world that you live in, and looking at numbers, we're used to seeing these patterns coming off of the coast of Africa. And the weather people track that, and of course it's projected out on screens, and they start tracking one, and it may be 3 or 4 days, and all of a sudden we get this inundation constantly on our quote TV screens or Facebook or wherever you're looking at it, and it becomes that it's almost like we're building to this anxiety level. Are we reaching a point now that we're seeing some of these tropical conditions that you've just talked about, high winds, maybe hurricane, maybe not, but definitely water, developing off of the coast in, say, the Gulf of Mexico or different places that are closer to this continent? And I want to kind of follow up on that after we come back from this break, and give people the idea that it's not always what we're tracking out of, way out in the ocean that's coming at us. It could develop within 48 hours and end up being an issue. So let's talk about that when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being with us. We're talking about weather and your impact, and we're talking with Nick Petro. We'll be right back.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home, so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
If you run a business, you need sales. To get sales, you need customers. To get customers, you need exposure. Let our team of experts craft and produce the perfect video ad to reach your intended audience while making the most of your advertising dollars. Call 1-800-706-6538 or visit starcom.net to contact our Star Communications production team and get your business moving to the next level.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. We're talking with Nick Petro, and he's with the National Weather Service. Nick, we're talking in this first segment, we really got into a lot of the particulars with hurricanes and those kinds of things. And one of the things that you pointed out as we went to break and you were talking about is these things are popping up now that puts unbelievable amount of water on the ground. The wind may be 30, 40 miles an hour. It may not be a Cat 1 through 5, a wind speed thing. It may be water. It may be something else. But are we seeing more of those kinds of tropical depressions developing more closer to the continent and not necessarily coming off the coast of Africa and building over several days, and we can track it with the cones and all that, and all of a sudden we see something happening down in the Gulf of Mexico, and the next thing we know it's headed up north and it's carrying 8-10 inches of water? What's the balance on the data that you're looking at?
Absolutely. Well, when we go back and look historically, we can see certain patterns evolving in a sense that it's not unusual, in fact, to see tropical storms and hurricanes developing closer to North America, the U.S., the U.S. coastline, simply because where they develop, as I referred to in the last segment, the development region, that actually shifts around the Atlantic basin based on the water temperatures.
That's back to the La Nina thing.
Well, we're talking water temperatures in the Atlantic.
Oh, okay.
Separate from the El Nino and La Nina.
Two different things.
We're talking Pacific versus Atlantic.
Gotcha.
So as it relates to the Atlantic basin, the storms develop where there's warm water. And climatologically speaking, the warmest water in the month of June at the start of the hurricane season is closer to the coast. Mm-hmm. That's where the Gulf of Mexico is adequately warm, and along the southeast U.S. coast and the Caribbean area. That's where the main development region will be early in the season. We're talking June and July, simply because the water hasn't warmed adequately off the west coast of Africa. Mm-hmm. So that's why this time of year, we're not really tracking storms or even just, seedlings, as we call them, coming off the west coast of Africa, because the water just simply isn't warm enough yet into the summer season. So is it unusual for a storm to form close to the coast? Not at all. In June and July, that's actually where they should be forming. They should be forming close in. And that's important because, we may not always be able to track it 7-10 days into the future coming off the west coast of Africa. Mm-hmm. We may only have literally days, or in some cases even hours, to prepare, simply because they form closer to home, closer to the U.S. coastline, and we have less time to prepare. So again, it all goes back to preparation. If you have a playbook on what you're going to do before, during, and after the storm, you should be able to pull that playbook out and follow it, during when these things threaten. Now, as we move later into the season, we're talking August, then we start to see the eastern Atlantic tropical basin, part of the hurricane basin, warm up adequately for storms to form as they come off the west coast of Africa. And certainly by September, that's the peak of warmth in the Atlantic basin. That's why September is the busiest month of the hurricane season, because that's when the waters all across the Atlantic are at their warmest. Now, once we get into October, and especially November, we're getting closer to the winter season. That's when the water temperatures start to cool down, and thus the hurricane activity begins to lessen as we get in as we go through the month of October and especially November, because it's just simply not warm enough water to support the formation of a hurricane.
One of the things that strikes me, again, we're just talking right now about a lot of the development of hurricanes, tropical storms, that kind of thing. I want to get into another area, maybe the next segment. But this particular thing that you look at analytically is multiple layers of data. I can only imagine, just from looking at some of the analysis I've looked at, you look at a huge amount of information from multiple levels that determines what the National Weather Service pushes out to people that we see on TV screens that shows the map. You guys are the people that do the analytics on that and then pushes it to them.
Oh, absolutely.
And a lot of folks don't understand that. You're in the background doing it, and they're on the front of the TV screen telling us about it.
Oh, it's amazing amount of data. Everything from wind to what is the wind at the surface, what is the wind at 5,000 feet above the ground, 30,000 feet above the ground, and everything in between, all the wind in between throughout the whole depth of the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. We're looking at data, both observational data to see what's happening now and can a storm be supported, to what's going to happen in the future as the storm does evolve. And then we're looking at things like water. How much water is in the atmosphere? How much rain are we going to see from a storm? Mm-hmm. And that's dependent on things like the forward motion of the storm, the onshore flow, and the tap of the moisture needed to create rain in the first place. And then how fast is the storm moving? Is it moving fast? Okay, if it's moving fast, then, any given area in the path may not receive as much rain because it's here, it happens, it's gone, it moves on. Mm-hmm. But if a storm slows down over a given area, then it stalls and it just keeps raining and raining and raining. And then how much water is in the basins, in the river basins, in the stream basins? Can they handle that much runoff? Mm-hmm. The runoff, we have to calculate, okay, if you get 12 inches of rain falling out of this storm, how will that flow into the streams, into the creeks, into the storm drainage, into the rivers? And then how high will the river get? Mm-hmm. How high will the stream get? Will they come out of their banks? Will the river flood? And then if the river floods, how high? And once it comes out, how long is it going to take to get back into the river and flow away? Will it get back in? Sometimes when water comes out of the river, it's like toothpaste coming out of the tube. You can't get it back in.
Exactly.
Right. So then how long is that water going to sit in the field before it evaporates because it can't get back into the river? Those are just a small number of the elements we're looking at. As you pointed out, the data, the analytics, we have to calculate all that. And if we didn't have super fast, complex, amazing computer power to help us make those calculations, our forecasts would not be as good as they are. But we are blessed with great computing power and great simulations that do a great job helping us make these predictions.
And the visuals, oftentimes that we get to see, and of course, folks can go to the National Weather Service webpage and you can pull up tremendous amount of information, and you can actually zero in on your area where you're living and kind of get a sense of, well, I'm here and this is what it's predicting, and all that's there that we can actually look at from the National Weather Service.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't necessarily have to go through the filter of a network channel TV. You can go straight to you guys.
We have a tremendous amount of data on our website. And how do you remember your website? Or our website, the National Weather Service. I've got an easy way to remember the National Weather Service website. If it's weather you love, it's weather.gov. So you'll never forget it now.
That. Weather.gov.
If it's weather you love, it's weather.gov. And if you go to weather.gov, you have at your fingertips everything from wind, temperature, rainfall, how much wind in the future, where's the storm going to go, am I in a watch warning or an advisory, should I be nervous, how can I prepare, there's preparedness information on there. It's just the data flow is practically endless because we have so much information, and it's updated numerous times a day. If it's hurricanes you love, it's hurricanes.gov. That'll take you to hurricanes.gov. Will take you to the National Hurricane Center, where the National Hurricane Center is an office of the National Weather Service, and they like to provide the big picture.
Yeah.
So our local office, which my office, I'm based out of Raleigh, that covers all of central North Carolina and the North Carolina coastal plain. We focus on the details specifically to our local area.
For this region.
Mm-hmm. The Hurricane Center, the National Hurricane Center, focuses on the big picture. Where's the storm going to go? Where is it going to make landfall? How strong will it be when it makes landfall? How strong will it be right after it makes landfall? The Hurricane Center has specialists who focus on those details. And when they determine all that information flows down to us at the local office, and then we drill down to the local details. How will it affect you and me in our local communities here in central and eastern North Carolina?
So if you go to hurricane.gov, it's important because you could look at a impact in Florida, and you say, well, I don't really care about Florida, but you should, because you can look at that and then determine where it's going from there, because it might be coming to you.
But there's one caveat to that. And that is, don't focus on the cone. Don't focus exclusively on the cone.
Which we've been fixated. Yeah, we've been fixated on that cone, looking at that.
We have been fixated on the cone. And unfortunately, people tend to think that if I'm not in the cone, I don't have anything to worry about.
Exactly.
And that is so amazingly wrong.
Yeah.
Because you can be well outside the cone and still have major hurricane impacts. Devastating, maybe even life-threatening hurricane impacts. Yeah. The cone only tells you where that eye of the storm is going to go. The eye's small. The eye's, 10 miles, 20 miles wide. That's all the cone tells you, is where's that eye going to go? But the storm, the overall storm, is way much larger than the eye, obviously. So don't focus exclusively on the cone. Go to weather.gov and drill down to your area and find out, how's this storm going to impact me?
It's interesting when I think about, and every time I talk to you, I have people stop me and they say, well, you should ask this, you should ask that. But you literally are the guy. You are the person. You are the face and the voice of the National Weather Service out of Raleigh. I want folks to understand that this is not, you don't just come down here and do this show occasionally, but you're all over eastern North Carolina. What are some of the things that you're hearing from people that they get confused about, or that they may need to have a bit more information, or maybe they need to reconsider how they're interpreting that information? Because I know you talk to a lot of people.
Well, there's two things that come right off the top of my head. And that's number one, people still get confused about the difference between a watch and a warning. A watch means that conditions are possible, where a warning means, okay, I got to take action now because it is going to happen. The watch is maybe, the warning is it's going to happen. The other thing is a lot of people now in our mobile, lifestyle with social media and all this data at our fingertips. There's a lot of stuff out there on the web and particularly social media about what's happening. And there's a lot of, I would say, hype and mis and disinformation on social media, oftentimes when it comes to storms. So you have to really kind of make sure if you're getting weather information on social media, you're getting it from a trusted source.
We're going to take a break, go to the break just a second, but I want to, when we come back, talk about that watch and warning thing. I think that deserves a lot of attention because it's critical for people out there listening. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking with the National Weather Service. Nick Petro is here with us today. We'll be back in a moment. Stay tuned.
Computer viruses, malware, and ransomware are out there. They're dangerous, and they can steal your identity and damage your equipment. Star Communications is now offering Protect IQ. The service adds an extra layer of protection to every device connected to your network, working quietly in the background. Star can help you protect yourself from the inside out with Protect IQ. Call Star today and take advantage of this free service when you sign up for whole home Wi-Fi with Star Communications.
How can your friend save you money? It's easy. Refer a relative, coworker, neighbor, or friend to Star Communications. Friend signs up for high-speed internet service. Friend's new account is confirmed. Friend gives your name to our service representative as the one who referred them to Star. You receive a $30 internet credit. It's just that simple. And even better, receive a $30 internet credit for every referral that results in a new confirmed account. High-speed internet from Star Communications. Refer a friend today.
Welcome back. We Should Know is on there. J.W. Simmons here, your host. We're talking weather today with Nick Petro, who is the guy that's the voice of the National Weather Service out of Raleigh, North Carolina. Nick, we cover a number of items, and we're kind of in this third segment of the show. I want to kind of emphasize to folks that we're covering as much information as we can with as much detail with the time we have. I mean, you could do a semester course here. In fact, you do go about the state and teach people, weather watchers. So we won't talk about that as well. But this part, I want to speak to not only continue the conversation about hurricanes, but continue the conversation about something we've seen a lot of, a tremendous amount just over the past few months, and that's tornadoes, straight line winds. And some of that comes from these tropical depressions, but they always come in with some add-ons that we hear from the National Weather Service. And that's what you mentioned a while ago, which is watch and warn.
Right.
If we hear the watch thing, we should, kind of like a car, I guess, you can put it in one gear or you could mash the brake or the clutch, whatever, but it kind of use an analogy to help us where our mind needs to be when we hear that other word, which is warn.
Okay. Let's say you want to make some cupcakes, right? And, you think about, okay, you get a recipe and your cupcakes call for, flour, sugar, all the ingredients, eggs, whatever you're going to put to make your cupcakes. And let's say you go to a store, you get all your ingredients and you spread them out on the counter, right? And you're going to go make those cupcakes. The very fact that you have all the ingredients to make a cupcake, you don't have the cupcake yet, right? But you have all the ingredients. That is the watch phase. So think about the analogy to a tornado. If you have all the ingredients for a tornado, just like you have all the ingredients laid out on your counter space to make your cupcakes, think of that as the watch. The cupcake watch means I have all the ingredients I need to make a cupcake, but I don't have the cupcake yet. I still have to put all those ingredients together and bake it before I get the cupcake. Mm-hmm. So the cupcake watch is just simply having the ingredients. The tornado watch or the hurricane watch or the flood watch or the hurricane watch is I have all the ingredients in the atmosphere in place to make whatever that hazard is. Okay. Now you take all the ingredients for the cupcake, you put it in the mixing bowl, you put it into the baking pan, you put it in the oven. And however long later, an hour later, you pull it out. And what have you got? You got a cupcake. That's a cupcake warning. That's the cupcake warning when you actually have the cupcake made. Okay. So the analogy in the weather is, okay, you might have ingredients for tornadoes, but you don't get the warning until the ingredients have all come together and actually created a actual tornado or an actual flood. But what we try to do is provide that warning before the event happens. So if I was making those cupcakes, I would put out a cupcake watch when I have all the ingredients put out on the counter. And then once I mix them and put them in the oven, then I put the cupcake warning out. I'll put the cupcake warning and say, in 30 minutes, we're going to have a cupcake. You got a cupcake warning. Mm-hmm. So when we issue a tornado warning, our goal is to try to provide you, 10 to 15 minutes of lead time to tell you that there will be a tornado affecting you. So it's just like the cupcake in the oven, an hour later, you're going to have a cupcake. 15 minutes later, you would potentially have a tornado if we issue a tornado warning. And that's what we call lead time. We try to provide lead time so people can prepare and seek shelter and seek safety before the actual tornado hits or before the actual flood hits or the hurricane or whatever the case may be.
So let's talk about some of those ingredients, some of those things that you look at that during that watch period that causes you to say, okay, this is something built. And I've got a couple of notes, but I want you to kind of give us a little more detail. Right. With the ability today, with today's analytics versus maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, some of the same information, but the detail of that information gives you more, focus not only on the ingredients, but how they're coming together, which causes you to be able to predict at a greater speed. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. And it's the ability to detect them as well.
Yeah.
And having the tools such as our radar, our radar that tells us where the storm is at, where it's going, what the winds are like inside the storm. So it's observational data is amazing. The technology at which it updates, it gets to us, but also the ability to predict. We run hourly predictions on near-term storm conditions. We run those every hour to predict where a thunderstorm, for example, will go. And will it strengthen? Will it weaken? Will it move to an area that's more supportive of storms? Will it split? Will it fall apart? Whatever the case may be, the amount of computing power that we have, we can simulate these storms after they've already formed to figure out what they're going to do 30 minutes, 60 minutes from now. The actual, formation of those weather events, whether it's a straight line wind event or a tornado or a flood, that's well understood. I mean, we have that. We have the understanding of how those form. We pretty much have that nailed down. Mm-hmm. But the ability to predict it still, it's such a small scale event, say a tornado or even a straight line wind gust, that it becomes more of an observational posture that we take when we're tracking these storms and we're watching them move into our area, maybe across our area, and then having the ability to predict whether or not it's going to produce a damaging wind gust or tornado. That's when we turn to more of our observational data and just our understanding, our mental understanding of how these storms work. Analyzing the data, looking at the data and saying, okay, I see a pocket of wind in the storm in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Is it going to crash to the ground or not? And if it does, okay, then maybe we issue a severe thunderstorm warning. That's a little insight into how the process works in our, as we call it, our warning decision process.
Do you use that same data? Because I think you're one of the guys that goes out and actually looks at damage to determine if it was, quote, straight line winds or tornado impact, and somebody wakes up the next morning and goes, look, all my trees are blown down and my car is sitting on top of the house, whatever. You go out and look at that. What are you looking for there that says to you, this was definitely a tornado, or this was category what F, right. So whatever that is, tornado. Talk about that, because I think a lot of folks don't understand there's analytics that goes into the prediction and there's analytics that goes into the results.
Right. Well, first of all, wind damage is wind damage, right? Straight line wind. The only difference of a tornado versus a straight line is that the wind is rotational and it's caused by a funnel. A straight line wind damage is just more of a sort of a pushing out effect of the wind. They both can cause similar damage. So a lot of times I'll get calls from folks saying, hey, I think I had a tornado move through here because I have some damage. But I want folks to know that tornadoes exclusively aren't necessarily the sole reason for damage. Straight line winds are actually much more common than tornadoes. Tornadoes are really rare. But when we do have damage reports, it's and we have a pretty strong suspicion that it's a tornado, I will go out and survey the area just to document it. We want to have we have actually a database of storm damage that we can go back and use to basically do case studies to maybe improve our warning services so that folks can get a sense of what happened or has happened in the past in my area. But the technology too is I could tell the difference between a straight line wind damage and a tornado pretty much with our radar data. Even before I get to a location where there's damage, I will usually know ahead of time whether it was straight line or tornado related. And that being because a tornado generally takes debris and it pulls it up into the sky and spreads it out into the sky. Whereas straight line wind tends to push the damage forward, but remaining on the ground. And our radar has the ability to decipher the difference between raindrops and debris. So when there's a tornado, if a tornado occurs, I'm generally going to know almost immediately when it's happening that a tornado is underway, because I'll see these debris signatures in the air. Versus straight line winds, I won't, because the damage and the debris is kept near the ground.
A question that came up, and first when I thought it's an interesting question, I thought I don't, but I'm going to ask this question. So when you look at tornadoes, and you just mentioned that the key thing here is that it tends to pick stuff up.
Yes.
Is there like a record of things that you have seen that tornadoes pick up that would be, sometimes folks will say, well, it literally picked up this car and moved it so many feet or put it over here. Is there a certain amount of weight that a tornado is just not going to pick up, or can it pretty much pick up anything is imaginable?
If it's a strong enough tornado, it'll pick up whatever it's going to pick up. I've seen so much damage and different types of damage and things. I've seen everything from just trees blown down to homes completely leveled and swept clean of their foundation. What's really fascinating is when I see a home that shifts off its foundation. I've seen homes that, you could tell were really well built, but maybe weren't anchored to their foundation as well as they could have been. And literally the entire home is intact, but it's like somebody turned and picked it up, turned it 90 degrees and just dropped it down. That's always fascinating to see that.
Yeah. And I think that the amazing part of that is, and that's exactly what I wanted you to talk about, is because the amazing part of that is oftentimes the house is still intact. Right. It's just been picked up as a cube almost and twisted or moved over.
Right. Well, you know what? Actually, since we're talking about homes that are turned on their off of their foundation, a lot of times I get questions from folks about where's it safe to shelter during tornadoes? Yeah. And one of the questions I frequently get is from people who have a crawl space. And they'll ask, is it safe for me? Should I go into my crawl space to seek shelter? I'm under my home. Yeah. And I always tell folks, don't do that. Yeah. If you have a basement is different than a crawl space. Absolutely. If you have a crawl space, don't seek shelter in a crawl space in case your home is shifted and then falls into the crawl space. You could be crushed if you're seeking shelter in a crawl space. Versus a basement, you're underground and you could put things like a table or something over you can crawl under a table to protect yourself from falling debris. So that's an important thing to keep in mind.
We're coming on our last break here, the last part of the show. When we come back, I want to follow up on some of those things that you just now mentioned, which is what do we do? How quick do we do it? Where do we go? We've heard a lot of that information before, but we want to hear it from you, and if there's other things we can do in preparation for this season of hurricanes. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking with the National Weather Service, Nick Petro, about what you need to do now when these hurricanes are coming. We'll be back in a moment.
Providing fewer commutes, more backyard offices, and crystal clear meetings. Providing less, you froze up, and more presence in your presentations. Providing a better internet experience. Providing possible.
You're out for an evening on the town. Finally a chance to relax and forget that you left your front door completely unlocked. Fortunately, you just installed a security system from Star Communications. With just your cell phone, you can check on your house, lock it down, light it up, and get back to relaxing.
You forgot to put Buster in his crate.
Unfortunately, we can't help with that. Security and automation from Star Communications. Call today to find out more.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're coming up on the last part of a show we call We Should Know. I'm J.W. Simmons, your host. We're talking about weather today, something critically important to you. And the guy that knows about that is years of experience with the National Weather Service, Nick Petro. And he's here today. And he's the kind of the warning guy and the mouth and the voice for the Weather Service here in this part of the state in North Carolina, out of Raleigh. Nick, thank you for coming down. We've done this multiple times over the past years. You've been so cordial in taking time to come and educate people. I want to mention in this last segment, very much up front, you have also been to this county and surrounding counties educating people on a weather watch warning kind of program. And that takes an educational process. And these folks then become on the ground eyes and ears as it relates to the weather.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we have a lot of great tools for tracking storms, right? Our primary tool being the radar. The radar, though, only sees what's happening in the sky. There's really two things that could see what's happening on the ground. Automated surface equipment, which is few and far between, maybe one at every airport, and people. And the ground truth reports, as we call it, what people are experiencing, is so important to our warning decision process. If we issue a weather warning because of something we see on the radar, we need to get information back to us about what truly did happen when the storm unleashed its wind or rain. Mm-hmm. And we get that information mostly from people. So we have a training program called Skywarn, where we can train folks who are maybe weather enthusiasts or maybe interested in volunteering their time to send us detailed information about what they're experiencing in their community during and after a storm moves through. So yeah, it's been a great pleasure to visit the area. And I recently, a few months ago, provided a storm training class. But we can do them pretty much any time. And we have actually online storm training that people could take for free. I did a real nice YouTube video that explains how to report severe weather back to the National Weather Service. You can find that on our webpage at weather.gov/Raleigh. And we'd love to have more volunteer weather spotters who report what they're experiencing back to us at the National Weather Service.
So they can get the same credit and certification
Absolutely.
by doing the online versus in the class.
I always love to do in-person classes when I can, but you know, in this busy world we live, we realize, you know, there's more people interested in taking the class than we can go out and visit. So we do provide an online option.
Yeah, and I encourage people to do that because it also helps emergency management and these areas and counties and on a regional basis as well. To have the more people and more eyes you got just adds that information to the detail of the computer and the satellites and the telemetry.
Absolutely. We call our spotters the eyes and ears of the Weather Service, providing that important information back to us.
All right. Okay, the next thing I want to get into is more detail on preparation and where we need and what we need and how we need it and how long before you start seeing that. We know there's certain things going to ramp up here in the next few weeks. We hit July and already in July, now we're in August, and as you just pointed out, September being the peak. What should we be doing now?
Right.
What should we be doing when we get that announcement from the Weather Service, and how quick should we have things already stored now? Batteries, flashlights, all, just tell us what we need to do. And people, if they need to make a checklist, now would be the time to either hit record or get your pencil out and make a checklist.
Absolutely. So we have different phases of preparation, and you're absolutely right. It begins long before the actual hurricane season. First step, knowing your hazard. Again, assessing whether you live in a flood-prone area, finding out what previous impacts have occurred with prior storms. Do you live in a forested area where there's a lot of trees that could fall? Do you live, learn your hazards and impacts that are custom to your area where you live. Mm-hmm. And then after that, you want to basically build a plan, a communication plan for your family in case people have to evacuate, or perhaps a plan on what to do, where to go, where to seek shelter. Building a storm kit, supplies to have. Oftentimes my emergency management partners that I deal with have a saying, the first 72 are on you. So when you want to go to the store, and you want to build that storm kit, ask yourself, what are you going to need in the next 72 hours? If I can't get to the store in the next 72 hours, if I'm stuck at home, or if I'm told to evacuate and I need to have the supplies I need to sustain myself and my family, what will I need for the next 72 hours? Typically, what we find is after 72 hours, things are starting to open back up and people are able to get back out. So what things, the common sense things, what would you need if you lost power, if you were stuck at home? Maybe, water, some batteries if the power goes out, flashlights, a battery powered radio so you can stay informed, maybe a cell phone, one of these external cell phone chargers where you can keep your phone charged up, extra medications. You don't want to be running low on medications during the hurricane season. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure you have extra, don't wait till the last minute to refill any necessary medications. Make sure you have enough of that. Have extras in your storm kit, a first aid kit, some blankets, things that, if you have pets, the supplies you might need for your pets. I can't possibly cover everything that would be needed in a typical storm kit for 72 hours. But if you go to ready.gov has a downloadable list that you can print out and check the list off after you build your storm kit. And then also take an assessment of your property. Where you live. Do you have maybe trees near your home that are maybe dead or rotting that might fall over with even a modest wind gust? If you have any hazards, things that you would have to maybe pick up and move into the garage or move into storage because they might blow around. These are things you want to think about, but well before the storms approach, early in the season. Make a plan. Okay, I'm going to move my patio furniture inside, or I'm going to tighten something down, or maybe even just, cut down those trees that are leaning towards my home because they're rotted or dead or whatever the case may be. Those are things that people should not wait until the last minute to do. Finally, and then there's actions right as the storm's approaching, during the storm, and after the storm. We need to make sure we have a way to receive warnings. Make sure you have, perhaps consider purchasing a NOAA weather alert radio. Make sure you have, a Red Cross or FEMA cell phone app so you can get help and relief if needed after a storm. Make sure you have everything that you need as the storm might be approaching. During the storm, make sure you know where to seek shelter. If you're told to evacuate, make sure you have a way to get out of your evacuated area and know where you're going to go. Figure that out ahead of time. After the storm's over, we need to be careful because there's cleanup, and a lot of people get injured and hurt, and some people even unfortunately perish during the cleanup and aftermath of the storm because maybe there's all kinds of hazards, especially if there's flood waters that you have to get through, fallen trees that might fall on your home, or maybe we've even heard stories of people having heart attacks trying to clean up and moving things, exerting themselves. Oftentimes it's hot. There's excessive heat after storms sometimes. So these are all things that, people can do now, think about now. Make a playbook, as I like to say it. Make a plan. It's easy. It's simple. It doesn't have to be extravagant. It could be simple, one page or just some bullet point notes. And then finally, the last thing is check your insurance. Make sure you have adequate insurance to cover storm damage. And if you live in a flood-prone area, be certain to get flood insurance.
And a lot of areas that we're seeing that historically haven't been flooded, that are typically not flood prone areas, with some of these hurricanes that I'm sure that you've witnessed, all of a sudden the house is flooded and it hadn't ever been flooded in, centuries. Yep. And now you're in a flood situation, but you don't have flood insurance.
Well, unfortunately, what is one thing we always hear after a storm? I never thought it would happen here, or I never thought my home would flood. So if your home or your office or has never flooded in the past, chances are your flood insurance is going to be pretty cheap. But it's better safe than sorry to have that flood insurance, because how many times have you heard people say, "I never thought it would flood here"? So definitely get a insurance checkup and definitely check on flood insurance.
I think that's critical, and you've covered that a number of times, and I'll go ahead and say I followed your advice and did that some time back. But it's, again, you really don't know. I mean, you could think that house and where it's at is on, and you may never need it. But from what I've discovered, relatively, if you divide it monthly, we're talking a small amount monthly to have your house covered. And
absolutely.
And it's some of the things you're talking about with insurance it's amazing. But I think the other thing I want to kind of mention, some of the things you've given us also afterwards is as critically important as before, because now if an emergency situation, if people can't get to you, they can't help you. And you have seen, of course, I've seen in my years of experience where roads were washed out. It was impassable. Trees were in roads. The only way you could get around was either a bicycle or a motorcycle to dodge trees. So those are the kinds of things that could be long-term in recovery beyond that period that we typically think, well, now the storm's passed, so we can get out and go find something. You might not be able to. It might be days.
Yeah. And, if you think about those things ahead of time, then you're all the better off, because, it's not a matter if you will need that playbook. It's when, because as we mentioned earlier, every hurricane season, we're going to either see something direct or indirect. So, in this time of the year, we're entering in the early part of the hurricane season. The peak of the season still ahead of us. From mid-August, all of September through early October, that's when we're most likely to see tropical storm and hurricane impacts here in North Carolina. So, folks, this is the time now to get ready.
And that ready situation is important in the sense I want to remind people that they can go to the website and they can pull up this information. They can look at it. They can actually print out on their computer, or if you don't have one, call one of your children and have them print it out for you. But look at that checklist and just now start looking. When you go to the grocery store, start picking up these items.
Oh, absolutely. You don't have to buy it all at once. You can, spread that cost out over weeks and basically make it a little easier. You mentioned there was one other thing you said that kind of brought another thing to mind, was that, check on your neighbors, check on your family members, because you might be watching this show and learning everything about hurricane preparedness. That doesn't mean your neighbor, your family members has done the same. So check on your friends, family, folks in your sphere of influence. Let's make sure everybody's prepared.
That sounds good. So, listen, I want to thank you again for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Hopefully, we won't have problems this year, but we're going to see you again soon and talk some more. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. We look forward to seeing you again right here on We Should Know, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.